Did you know that approximately 20% of the entire population has dyslexia? So 1 in 5 people. So in your typical American classroom, you could be talking about 4, 5, 6 kids. So, what is dyslexia? If your child is struggling to read, to decode, but they're bright in everything else, then there's a good chance that they might have dyslexia. And so you're going to want to stick around. Today, what we're going to do is do a general overview of the brain science of dyslexia in very layman's terms. However, if you are a science person and you want a much more scientific explanation, I'll put a link to click below. And then we're going to also talk about this paradox. Why is it that kids who have dyslexia that they may fly under our radar? Why don't we know what's going on there? And then finally, the last piece that we'll talk about is how do we help those kids? So in the human brain, we have, right, the left and the right hemisphere, we have the forward and the back. So when a typical brain is reading, and we know this because we've done imaging of the brain, of the typical brain while a person is reading, there are 3 areas of activation. There are 2 towards the front, 1 towards the back. And the way that the 3 areas are working in tandem together for skilled readers is there's a piece of the brain that's really recognizing the oral part of language, the phonological components. For example, every word I'm saying right now is made up of individual sounds. So that's the phonological piece. Then there is the kind of visual mapping of words piece so that as I'm seeing as a skilled reader the same words over and over again, I'm not having to stop and sound them out. I can look at this word and know that it says dyslexia because my brain has successfully mapped the sounds of language over to the visual system of the alphabet in a very efficient way. Another piece of the brain that's working in harmony is the portion of the brain that really helps me with the pronunciation of my words and sounds. So, those are the 3 areas of the brain that are really active in skilled readers. Now, in dyslexic brains, what the science shows us is that the activation patterns are really different. So the left hemisphere of the brain is just got a reduced amount of activity. And that one area that is active, there's an anomaly and that it's overactive, right? It's trying to compensate. So that's my very shorthand, like I said, non scientific explanation of what's happening in the dyslexic brain. Now, here is what's very confusing and hard, and why, for some parents, family members, teachers, to understand and identify dyslexia when a child has it, is that it's different from IQ. So most kids with dyslexia have average or above average intellect. So they're very bright, they're very capable. It's that one thing of reading that seems to be a hiccup. So a lot of times, what will happen is a teacher or a family member, a well meaning person might say, they're just lazy. She's not trying. She could do it if she wanted to, but she just won't. So that is a typical response, unfortunately, and let yourself off the hook and give yourself grace if that sounds like a response that you or someone you love once gave to a child in your life or to yourself, because Again, the high intelligence can mask. So you'll hear about the concept of masking. And what that's saying is, or what we mean by that, is that the child is able to use their high cognitive skills and their coping strategies to hide the fact that they really struggle to read. So they might volunteer to do other things in class that really show their strengths, their cognitive strengths, but they will excuse themselves when it's time to read out loud. The problem with masking on a social emotional level is that it creates a lot of stress, especially when children have a higher IQ. The last thing they want to be seen as is stupid, right? Not intelligent. So the stress of trying to hide that, the anxiety that you might get called upon to read out loud or read in front of the class. So sometimes this sort of dyslexia is called stealth dyslexia. The kids have gotten really good now at a young age when the text is made up of so many sight words, they might be able to memorize words based off of the shape and the look of the words. Or they might say something really close to what the word is because some of the shapes of the letters they've memorized. So those are some of the things you might see that are indicators. Now, before we get to the teaching part of what works for kids and adults with dyslexia, I want to pause for a moment because what we've talked about is where their brain is inefficient in reading, where the weaknesses are. But I would like to spend some time flipping it to the other side and talking about the possibilities and the strengths and the beauty of the dyslexic brain. Now, to be fair, this is a newer area of science, but if you even go in today onto LinkedIn, you will see that dyslexic thinking is a skill that people can put, perhaps you can put, into their talents and skills. So, what do we mean by dyslexic thinking? It appears there are many hypotheses, and there's some early science to indicate. We talked about how a different part of the brain is maybe overactive, trying to compensate. It turns out that perhaps because of the dyslexia itself, or because of the way that the brain compensates in the face of dyslexia and the task of reading, that dyslexic brains tend to be big picture thinkers. They tend to see patterns that other people miss. They tend to have very capable visual spatial abilities, menagerie of strengths that may be a result of the way that their brains are wired that is somehow tied to their dyslexia. And there are some great organizations out there made by dyslexia. There's an author who wrote a book, The Gift of Dyslexia, because there really is a community of folks out there who feel that school and reading has been a struggle. However, their dyslexic brain has given them strengths and capabilities they might not otherwise have developed had they not had dyslexia. So I just paused to share that with you to let you know that when you talk about dyslexia with your family and your child, when you are on the lookout for dyslexia in your child, it's important to know that just because certain parts of the brain aren't working as efficiently as we want them to for the task of reading, that brain is gorgeous and capable and doing great things. Reading is hard. Let's get to our third piece of today, which is what do we need to do, right, to help these kiddos and dyslexic adults, it's never too late, learn to read? And so this is very well researched. The kids need a structured literacy program. And if, say, your child gets an IEP for dyslexia, you will likely see if a specialized program is indicated, it'll say something along the lines of structured literacy. So, what components do that have? That has a big emphasis on phonological skills, right? So, that part of the brain that's putting together sounds, pulling apart sounds, manipulating sounds, there's a big push on developing the phonological component of the brain. The program needs to be structured, it needs to be sequenced. So you start with the simplest of skills and you grow in complexity. It needs to be cumulative so that everything is building on top of each other, leading you to that ability to decode words and read. To that end, you also are looking for something that is multisensory. So, what does that mean? Multisensory. Again, back to the brain, there are all these different zones of the brain. There's zones that process touch, speech, hearing, visual. And so, when a dyslexia therapist, a skilled dyslexia therapist, working with your child, they're pulling in all sorts of sensory systems so that the child can really access the learning. Because ultimately, what's happened, and again, brain scans have shown this on a dyslexic brain, is when the intervention is done with fidelity, it's done according to the intensity, frequency, and duration that's required, new neural pathways in the brain will develop, which is extraordinary, so that the brain can become more efficient at reading. It will lay down new neural pathways. I think this stuff is exciting. I geek out on it. So let's see, we talked about cumulative, structured, we talked about the sequence, the multisensory. It also needs to be diagnostic and prescriptive. So, a great dyslexia therapist or tutor who is working with your child is going to do checks, going to monitor and see which concepts have been mastered and where we need to shore up and do some more work, maybe attack it from new angles. And then it's going to need to be a comprehensive program. So it's not just decoding, it's not just spelling, it's also fluency and comprehension, morphology, orthography, right? A whole comprehensive approach towards literacy development. So once that is in place, the rewiring can begin. And that is what brings us to why you want to make sure you're looking for a highly qualified dyslexia therapist or tutor. Now, if you come across a certified academic language therapist, a CALT, we're also sometimes called dyslexia therapists. We have the most extensive training and national testing. So, if it is a training program that is recognized by ALTA, the Academic Language Therapy Association of America, and someone is going through that CALT program, then they really are highly qualified. There are a series of Orton-Gillingham tutoring levels that are recognized by the International Dyslexia Associations, and those are going to be some very skilled tutors. I would love for you to go ahead and subscribe, because what's going to happen is on January 12th, I'm going to be sharing my Start Here Parents Guide for a dyslexia. And in that guide, I'm going to break down all the different kind of certifications and designations and questions that you'll want to ask of your interventionist so that you can make sure your child is being well served. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Faye. I'm the home reading coach. I feel like maybe I didn't say that earlier. I got excited about the brain science. And this channel, Teach My Child to Read, is your resource here on YouTube. I hope to see you again. Please click subscribe. Thank you